Welcome to Critical Conversations, a Latinx learning series powered by the Ford Foundation and the Latinx House. Today's episode is Immigration, How to Fix a System That Was Made Broken. And now, welcome the co-founder of the Latinx House, Mónica Ramirez.
Good afternoon. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I am the co-founder of the Latinx House. My name is Mónica Ramirez, and it is our great pleasure to bring this series of conversations to you today. The Critical Conversations are part of the Latinx learning series that we developed with the Ford Foundation. These conversations are meant to bring to us the opportunity to discuss issues that are of importance to the Latinx community. They also help us to understand some of the issues in which our community is being underrepresented and has been underfunded by philanthropy. Critical Conversations will provide us with the opportunity to center our discussions on the intersectional realities of our communities and the need to pay attention, infuse resources, and learn why it is important to invest robustly in our communities. As was mentioned, today's conversation is on immigration, how to fix a system that was designed broken. We certainly know that many immigrants in our country have faced barriers, starting with navigating and accessing the immigration system, to being able to fully thrive, be seen, and to be treated with dignity. Here to help us frame our panel discussion is Anita Kashuv. She's a senior program officer with the Ford Foundation and their Gender, Racial, and Ethnic Justice team. This team oversees the Foundation's immigration rights portfolio. Welcome, Anita.
Thank you, Mónica, for inviting me to join you, but more importantly, for your leadership of Latinx House and for organizing these critical conversations. The Ford Foundation is proud to be partnering with the Latinx House on important conversations like the one we'll be having today on immigration. The immigrant justice movement has been bold and inspiring, but what few may appreciate is how thinly resourced it is, especially given the defining issue immigration has become for this nation. This session aims to help us learn about how the immigrant community has showed its power and the ways in which immigrant justice organizations and leaders are concretely improving the lives of communities they organize and serve. If you joined us for the first conversation, you've heard this next piece, but we believe it bears repeating. There are 62 million Latina residents within the U.S., representing 19% of the total national population. A focus on Latina identity and the intersections that impact how they live, survive, and thrive in the U.S. hold lessons crucial for rebuilding and sustaining a truly multiracial democracy. I am really excited and grateful that you've all joined us today and look forward to a robust conversation. Thank you.
Well, thank you again. And this is a really important conversation, and I could not think of a better team of individuals to be with us in order to have the conversation. It is my pleasure to introduce our special guests for this conversation. Joining our panel are my friend Paola Mendoza, who is a woman of many talents and many achievements. I'm sure that you know her work. And if you don't know her work, you're going to get to learn more about it today. Paola is an author of an award-winning book called Sanctuary. It explores the trauma experienced through xenophobia. She's also the co-founder and organizer of the Original Women's March in 2015. And she's currently a filmmaker at the helm of telling a beautiful and important story about domestic workers in our country. Paola uses her art, her power, and her voice to uplift immigrants across our country, and she helps to shine a light on the experiences that individuals have in our country and what needs to be changed here in the U.S. for the immigrant community to live a full and thriving life. And thank you, Paola, for all of your leadership, and thank you for joining us for today's conversation.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
And joining Paola today is Angelica Salas. She is an immigrant from Durango, Mexico, and she's someone who has lived the experience and has been touched by all aspects of the immigrant experience, from her family living here undocumented to experiencing deportation and eventually becoming a U.S. citizen. Angelica became Cheerla's executive director in 1999. Over the course of her tenure, she has transformed Chirla into a mass membership immigrant-led organization that empowers immigrants and their families and has become one of the nation's largest and most effective immigrant rights organizations to organize, advocate, educate, and provide legal services to all immigrants. Thank you, Angelica, for all of your leadership and for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me this morning. It's such a pleasure to be with you and with all the rest of my colleagues who are also advancing the rights of immigrants in this country.
Thank you again. And we also have Maegan Llerena, who is joining us. She is currently the executive director of Make the Road Pennsylvania. Maegan's path began as a social worker who then transformed into a community organizer to fight for justice issues impacting the Latinx community. She's worked tirelessly across Pennsylvania to seek justice and access while building power for Latinx communities. She continues to bring her passion for her community to the fight for workers, immigrants, women of color, and LGBTQ rights through the statewide organizing work that is done by Make the Road. They're doing this work every single day, and I'm proud to know you, Maegan, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. The pleasure's all mine. I look forward to the conversation.
Just introducing y'all. We haven't even gotten to the conversation yet. All right. And last but certainly not least, I am honored to introduce Chelsea Rendon. Chelsea Rendon is an actor, an activist. She's breaking so many barriers, and we're so pleased to have her today as our moderator. She's taken on roles in films that are beginning to tell stories, broader stories about the Latinx community. As an artist, she's creating her own content, and she looks forward to being part of the power-building wave of Latinx artists in Hollywood, expanding the narratives that we see on TV and in film. Chelsea, thank you for joining us, and take it away.
Thank you. I appreciate it, and I'm so honored to be here. First, I got to thank you, Monica, and thank you to both the Latinx House and the Ford Foundation for having us today. I just want to remind you that we will be having a Q&A after for the audience. So if you have any questions throughout the panel, feel free to put them into the chat so that way we can see them at the end. Now, let's jump in. First, I'd like to start off with a quick round robin to all of our panelists. So if you can briefly share how you and your organization build power and advocate alongside immigrant communities, specifically Latinx immigrants. So let's start with you, Angelica.
Sure. So at Chirla, the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights, we believe that power is core. And we are a mass membership, dues-paid membership organization that does its work in California, but also engages at the local, state, and federal level to advance our rights. We are an immigrant-led organization, so about 94% of the people who work at Chirla in its 11 offices across the state of California and in Washington, D.C., are immigrants themselves. Majority of the individuals who are part of the Chirla family are themselves immigrants. We are a mixed status organization, but we are also representing different communities from all over Latin America, certainly the majority being Mexican, but from all over Latin America, the Caribbean, also Africa, Asia, because we believe an organization to be powerful needs to represent that or represent the community it serves. And then we build power community by community. We believe deeply in the power of organizing and about advancing our work and our mission with the immigrants we serve. So we don't say we advocate for immigrants, we advocate with immigrants in order for our communities to have a powerful voice on the issues that impact their lives.
Great. Okay, now Maegan.
Yes, so immigration is an issue close to the hearts of many Make the Road Pennsylvania members and leaders. Much of our membership are either undocumented themselves or come from mixed status families, so they feel the weight of our unjust and violent immigration system every day. We are a grassroots organization, so we do have a large membership base. We have weekly committee meetings and monthly membership assemblies where immigrant members build their leadership and organizing skills and work together to plan campaigns to fight for their rights. These are the spaces where members feel safe to openly talk about how immigration has impacted them and their families, and to be in community with one another to share those similar experiences. The stories of our member leaders are at the very center of all of our campaigns and all of the work that we do. They are at the forefront. One of only 3 family detention centers is in our backyard, or was in our backyard, and is now being used as a detention center for women. Undocumented residents of Pennsylvania are unable to get driver's licenses, financial aid to attend college, or health insurance. Many PA communities, including Hazleton, where we are building an organizing center, have a history of passing xenophobic and racist policies. Make the Road has been and will continue to fight for immigrant rights locally in Eastern Pennsylvania, at the state level and nationally, and we'll continue to do everything we can to work with folks just like Angelica from Chile.
Amazing. Thank you, Maegan. Okay, finally, Paola, how does building power alongside immigrant communities show up in your work?
Thank you so much for allowing me to talk about a subject and people that are very near and dear to my heart. I myself am an immigrant. And I decided to be a storyteller very early on in my career. And I realized I needed to tell the stories of where I came from, specifically the story of my mom. And it was in exploring the story of my mom that I really realized that my life work was to tell and explore and be a bridge to the stories of immigrants. And so for the past 15 years, I have been telling the stories of immigrants. I'm an independent artist. I work on my own, but I also have had the great honor to work with a variety of many, many immigration organizations across the country. And for me, I believe that my work is to tap into people's hearts by telling stories of immigrants. I think that we have been for a very long time, but particularly for the past 5, 6, 7 years, in a moment in the United States where people's hearts are contracting. And so it's my job to tell the stories, to reopen the heart of the American people to immigrants, to combat all of the stereotypes, the negative stories, the lies, the injustices that are out there. And it is work that I think we have seen in the immigrant rights movement do way before obviously I've been doing it. And we've seen the successes of that. We've seen the success of the power in telling stories alongside the organizing and alongside the policy work that needs to get done. I think that it's that trifecta that really has allowed us to advance and is really the way forward for the world that we're trying to create and the world that I imagine in my brain and in my heart, and that all of us here want to see come to fruition in our lifetime.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you all, ladies, for all that you do. And I'm so honored to be here with you today. So Maegan, I wanted to shift into talking about narratives. So there are a lot of narratives about the immigrant community. In your opinion, can you talk about the power of narrative to further the movement and win equity for immigrants in the U.S.?
Yes. So the narrative of immigrants is deeply rooted in white supremacy. There is, in this country, there is only 2 kinds of immigrants, the good kind and the bad kind. Immigrants are oftentimes portrayed as the problem, or they're the complete opposite of the spectrum. They are the model success story and what you should look up to be. If we take how Haitian immigrants and Latinx immigrants are treated versus Ukraine refugees, you can see the clear difference in how, and it feels clear to us why. And this is not to pin us against each other. This is all of our fights. So much of the political fight around immigration is about division and scarcity. And we can play a really important part in telling a different story, a true story about our lives and the abundance of resources to be shared. Depending on where you are in this country, even at the highest level of government, a strong anti-immigrant narrative can and has gotten people elected. We have just seen this occur. It can not only be that people are going to school and have high GPAs. No, everyone has the right to migrate. Everyone has the right to make that choice for themselves and their families. So we need to not only explore shifting the narrative, we need to change policies that allow for anti-immigrant policies to keep coming up. Every year, we need to reassess what equity means. We need to keep shifting and transforming what would be equitable for our communities. This is the policies that worked 5, 10 years ago are not what's enough anymore. And the policies that we will win today or tomorrow will not be enough in a year, 2, 3 from now. This includes having a seat at the table for impacted community members. Directly impacted people are the experts of their lives. No one else should be telling the stories but themselves. And they should be holding the mic and leading the way on strategy and solutions. And that is especially true for immigrant communities.
Thank you so much, Maegan. So continuing with this thread about how we talk about immigration, Angelica and Paola, could you share your thoughts on how we effectively contradict the following? So the public narrative about immigration has often focused on the law, but advocates and organizers have employed many strategies in order to lift up, serve, empower, and support immigrant community members that honor their whole being. So what are some of the ways that you and your organization do this outside of policy work? Paola, can we start with you?
Most definitely. I really try and root my storytelling in a full, flawed human being. I allow the people, or I don't allow, I tell their stories in such a way that allows them to be seen as full human beings. Three-dimensional, I push against stereotypes. I also am very well versed and very aware of making sure that the stories that I'm telling are dignified stories. It doesn't mean that the stories are all about dignity, but the stories that I'm telling are dignified themselves. And that's a really important, very nuanced way in which to tell stories, but really important. And I often, in my work, I went down to the caravan to tell the stories of people that were coming to the United States, why they were here, mothers and children. I've been to the border many, many times. In 2014, under the Obama administration, when there was many thousands of minors crossing the border. And so to tell those stories, to try and make people understand on the other side that don't have access to these stories, why people are coming. And again, it goes back to this idea of opening people's hearts. But I say all that because ultimately the stories that I tell is when I meet people and I find them at their most vulnerable and many times in their most painful moments in their lives. And so my responsibility there is to bear witness to this moment in time and to then translate that story literally and figuratively to other people, to the masses. And I think that is a way in which we're pushing against stereotypes. We're not talking about our labor and how immigrants are only here to work, and that is the thing that we provide in this country, but rather talking about us from a human standpoint, and really embracing that human dignity that we all have and that is all universal.
Amazing. It's so important to humanize us as a whole. And I think that's missing a lot. So, Angelica.
At Chirla, we say we are guided by the vision, love, and courage of the immigrant community which we work and serve. And so our perspective is that we can't be defined by that which we lack, which is a document that says we're legal in this country. We're more than that. We are way more than that. And so the work that we do is to really look inward and really see the power that our community has, to really tap into the resilience of our community, to talk into the creativity, the vision, and I always say we're more than just we're more than just suffering. We actually have joy, and we have just so much love in our community, and that is where our power lies. And so what we do at Chirla is connect individuals, immigrant families, with each other. So we practice an intergenerational organizing methodology, which seeks to connect adults and youth together in their communities, to really envision their communities differently, more inclusive, more just, and that they can look inside a family and say, okay, so what is the power we have in this family in order to advance those things that our community needs? I feel so proud to be part of this organization because through this process, we've connected with artists, young people who are actually creating beautiful visions of what they see in their community, musicians, filmmakers, and people who love poetry, and all of that is important in order to advance. But we also believe in the power of and solidarity. So that means that we're very rigorous about also saying to ourselves, how are we going to grow as political actors in our communities? What do we need to understand about the way democracy works in our community, and how do we insert ourselves in these processes? So again, what is it that we have? What is it that we can contribute versus that which is being defined of us, which is that we are, undocumented, powerless, and voiceless. No, actually, we have a power. We're very visible in our communities, and we can actually engage and invest in our communities in order for us to live a better life. So that's the way we combat some of the stereotypical narratives of what is how we're described as immigrants in this country.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you, both of you. So now for each of you, we say at the top, this is a broken system. Now, what's one critical shift that you believe needs to happen in order for us to move towards a more transformative shift for immigrant communities? So this is for everyone. So let's start with Maegan.
Great. I've been thinking about this a lot and having conversations with other EDs in Pennsylvania, specifically with white-led organizations. So I want to take this a different route. The driving question that between our conversations are, what could we accomplish if we worked on immigration together strategically? There is a shift that is important to not see this as only our labor. It can't just be on us to change the minds and the hearts and the souls of the way people have seen immigration for hundreds of years. Those organizations could be doing the work to change the minds of white folks in more rural, that word doesn't come out naturally, but more rural areas. White people can be organizing white people about immigration to, as we talked about before, change the narrative about what an immigrant is in this country, and change their minds and dismantle the ideas rooted in white supremacy to challenge folks that probably have never been truly challenged or educated on immigration, and see that this is their fight too, that this would actually make their lives better if they worked alongside us instead of against us. Because in reality, the system is against us. It's against poor working class folks, and immigrants are a layer in that community. So I think that's where I would a place I would start.
Awesome. Okay, so now let's go with Angelica.
Well, the way I think about it, first of all, this would take a long time. But first and foremost, I think the current immigration system is a result of over 40 years of intentional dismantling of the winds of the 1965 civil rights movement that was trying to make our immigration system more racially and ethnically equitable. This nation's immigration system is founded on the premise that only white Europeans are deserving of legally entering the United States and becoming Americans. Black, brown, and Asian immigrants are recruited to have their labor and their talent extracted and exploited, but without a guarantee that they too will have the opportunity to stay in this country, much less to also bring their families with them. So the way that I think about fixing our immigration system is to insert racial and ethnic equality, but also equity into the system, because the randomness of your birth country cannot determine your ability to migrate to the United States to seek protection or to be reunified with your family. This system is obsolete. It needs to be modernized. We're operating on a system that was built in the 20s and the 40s, maybe, reformed in the 60s. This system needs to be malleable to support the current realities that necessitate a system to expand and contract in response to people fleeing from war, hunger, poverty, violence, persecution, or climate disasters. The last thing I want to say about this, and there's so much more to say about the system and how it can become better, is that right now, the United States boasts of 1 million people are allowed to come into the U.S. every year. But what they don't say is this 1 million people is out of over 250 million individuals who have been forced to leave their home countries and to migrate. Right now, they're close to 83 million people who are seeking refuge, who are considered refugees. And yet this country has only put as a goal for entrance into the country 125,000 refugee entrants. That doesn't make any sense. These limited quotas of entry into the United States needs to change. That needs to be more realistic, and it needs to respect human and labor rights in migration. This system, and I would just say, when people talk about it's broken, my perspective is it's not broken. It's intentionally designed in order to extract and exploit human beings, and that needs to change. And we need to expose it for what is happening. And I would also just say that at the end of the day, communities from Latin America, this is about the Latinx House. Since 2008 to 2018, 94% of the people who have been detained and deported from this country have been people from Latin America, majority from Mexico, Central America, and then South America. And then our Black brothers and sisters have been the folks who have been the most detained based on criminal convictions. This needs to change, and we need to expose it in order to change it. So there, again, so much more to say, but at least I think that's the way we can change it.
And Paola, so what is one critical thing that you think can help move us?
Well, I will leave the policy experts to talk about the critical changes that need to happen from a policy perspective, and I couldn't agree more with everything that was said. And I will say that from the work that I do, I grew up at a time where I didn't see my mother's stories, which in turn were my stories, which in turn were my community stories, being told in television shows, in the books I was reading, or in the movies I was watching. We were just completely erased from the narrative of the United States. And what that does to people, young people, communities, is it makes us feel like we're not welcome, like we're not worthy, like we are actually not part of the fabric of this country. But in reality, we are the foundation. The women that I grew up with, my mother's story, who she was, what she did, is the foundation. It is critical to the success of this country. And I'm not talking about labor. I'm talking about everything beyond that, the cultural success, the idea of democracy, the idea of freedom, what we're striving for. And so what I feel and what I want to focus on, and what I have been focusing on for the entirety of my artistic life, is to bring these stories to the mainstream, to bring these stories to our people, my people, to the little girls that were like me and want to see themselves reflected. And we're making strides. We have shows and we have movies and we have books, but we definitely don't have enough. And so to me, that is for our own self-empowerment, our storytelling, but it also, as I mentioned before, is to open up the heart of those that don't know us, that don't know our stories, that don't have access to us in an everyday experience, or are afraid of us, or have misinterpretations of us. And I think that for me is the thing that I would change from a storytelling artistic perspective.
Yeah, I completely agree, especially like you said, if people don't have Latinx folks around them, they get their information from the media. And we have been portrayed as the bad guys all the time. And we need to switch that narrative to help humanize us to the people that don't have us around the block. So 100% agree. Thank you. So thank you all for those examples. There's so much work that we can do and that needs to be expanding on outside of the legislative flight that seems to solely focus on criminalization or citizenship. And it leads me to wonder, like, where we are winning. So, Maegan, can you specifically expand on the following? Despite being an under-resourced movement, the immigrant community and immigrant rights movement have made major strides. So in your mind, what are some of the big wins?
Yeah, I have to take this time to give Make the Road New York and the Few Coalition in New York their roses for their historic excluded workers funds. This was an absolute beautiful example of what is possible when you are ready and willing to put everything on the line. There were hunger strikes, there was joy in the streets, like Angelica was talking about. It's not just the struggle, it's the joy in our communities. And there was a massive victory that has led folks to still now continue to work for even more or fight for even more. And there has also been wins just recently in New York and New Jersey, where they have won licenses for undocumented folks, something that our members have been asking for. And to be able to see it in a nearby state has been given them hope and kept them motivated. There are now Black immigrant organizations like Undocu Black, showing how far and wide we are expanding as an immigrant rights movement to meet the needs of our immigrant communities. In the movement, we have grown our electoral reach as well. We have been able to expand our C4 work, and organizations like Make the Road Action have been exercising their electoral power, because without changing the legislative body, you cannot change harmful policies or push for more progressive policies. So being able to even do that, being able to expand on the work that we're already doing, has been historic and beautiful.
Amazing. So just a quick follow-up on that. What more do you think the movement could do if it were properly resourced, Maegan?
Yes. So I am in Pennsylvania, an important purple state, a state where it is incredibly hard to pass progressive policies. I just mentioned this. We have the second largest legislative body in the country. And we need to do deep civic engagement, defending democracy, protecting voter rights work in these communities. There is often a separation of issues within Black communities and other communities of color, with mass incarceration, with mass deportation, with the crisis in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, where we are separated by issues. However, what is powerful about changing how we view this is how this actually ties us together. The government treats immigrants as disposable, and we are told by the narrative already discussed that it's because they are undocumented, because they are the issue. But in reality, this is a race issue. I heard someone once reference racism as the first original sin, and I found this to be powerful. If you look at all of our issues and you can nail it down to it being racism, capitalism, white supremacy are the driving factors to the issues that we have to deal with on a daily basis. If we invested early into these communities, we could turn out more people of color who will vote for more progressive candidates, who will not just say that they're going to fight for immigrants. Anybody can say that. But what we will see is them actually fighting for immigrants. We will not have to beg for our rights. The problem is when we don't have enough resources, or when there are not enough resources early on, what happens is we are left out. People of color are cut out of turf. What if we shifted the voters we prioritized? How would we be able to shift the legislative body and the overall makeup of our government if we did that? How do we work to invest in our communities so that what they wanted, if they wanted to grow skills and develop skills in grassroots research, policy types of organizations, types of nonprofits, they could do that. We did this at my organization, at Make the Road Pennsylvania. We developed members to become canvassers, and become a permanent part of our infrastructure. We developed their skills so they could lead programs, and we could scale up quickly. This was without any funding to do that development work. Imagine what we could do if we were actually properly funded, or we were given the tools to provide that education, already the trainings in more than one language, so that our teams could be fully equipped to run these programs. And it will not lie on just the political director or myself to provide that for them. If we were set up for success, like what would that look like? I think when you say that question, I think about being set up for success. People of color are not set up for success, and I would love to shift that.
Amazing. Very, 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 very true. Okay, so don't forget to please send in your questions. We already have one question that I'm going to do right now. So it says, the pandemic changed many things, including the focus and uplift of essential workers. So Paola, can you speak to the tension between this reality? Early during the pandemic, there was an emphasis on the critical work of essential workers, many of whom are immigrants. This narrative has placed the value on the work and not the people. How do we shape the narrative to both uplift the essential role immigrants play in our community, but also ensure that immigrants are not only valued for their work?
Yeah, that's a very important question. And I think that what I tried to do with my project, Immigrants Are Essential, was to take that concept that we had heard, that word at that point for over a year, essential, 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 and try and flip it a little bit on its head. because when we were thinking about essential workers at that time, was a very specific type of worker. And I wanted to talk specifically about the people who I see and feel are essential to our country and society as a country, and talk about them and how we lost them in the pandemic and how they weren't part of the conversation, and what responsibility do we have to those families who died in the pandemic, who were also essential workers, more than essential workers, essential people to the conversation. And, it was really important to me also in this project. I was telling the stories of 8 undocumented immigrants who died during the pandemic, some of whom were essential workers, some of whom were not. But I wanted to honor their lives and not necessarily focus on their death, to not make the project about death, but rather to make the project about celebrating their lives, to honor and memorialize them with their families. And so I used bright colors, and I used music, and I used iconography from various cultures in Latin America and the Philippines to uplift those stories. And to me, that was all about pushing back against the concepts around immigrants only being good here in this country for our labor, and that we need immigration reform because we need our labor. And the conversation definitely expanded beyond labor, and we talked about the humans that were here, and the amount of people that had died in the pandemic who were undocumented, and how they died, and what, again, responsibility do we have to them and to their families. They gave the ultimate sacrifice so we could literally have food on our tables, and we could go to the doctors, and we could make sure that our children were able to go to school, all of these things that were essential to living, and they were essential themselves. So I think, again, my job as an artist, my job as someone who tells the story of immigrants is, and it was said earlier, that what is equitable now will not necessarily be equitable in 5 years from now. And I love that idea. And also the artwork and the stories that we're telling now are going to evolve and shift and change into the artwork and stories that we're telling in 5 years from now. And so to be open to this concept and to this idea and to push us all forward will bring us all towards the goal that we are ultimately all here today in this moment fighting for and striving for.
Amazing. Okay, so another question would be to Angelica, continuing to hold on to how we ensure immigrants are seen and treated as whole humans. I wanted to ask about the persuasive problem within immigration discussions. So often we hear people speak and try to separate immigrants based on good and bad narratives and to attempt to define what makes being outside the system okay and an actual violation. So how do we refrain from engaging in creating a hierarchy of immigrants? Angelica?
Sure. So a lot of people know that in California, we've advanced the rights of immigrants, whether it's access to driver's license, access to financial aid for our students, access to healthcare, safety net, business licenses, etc. I think what's less known about what we've done in California is how we've partnered with organizations like Californians for Safety and Justice, the Drug Policy Alliance, the ACLU, to actually advance legislation that seeks to decriminalize immigrants and to also insert immigration in criminal justice reforms. What I believe that in many instances, there is a caricature of who we are as immigrants, this idea that we are perfect angels that do nothing wrong. But in fact, we're just like everybody else. We're human beings. And with human beings, you have many times, situations that force you in many instances, because we are a community that is over policed and over prosecuted, that actually connects you with law enforcement and where you do have criminal convictions. What ends up happening is that our communities, especially the Latinx immigrant community, has sort of double punishment. Not only are you do have a criminal violation in terms of whatever the conduct was, and then you're penalized for it. But in addition to that, we have what I call a sentence enhancement, which is deportation. And many times, immigrant communities, in order to try to protect themselves, seek to say, we're not, that's not who, we're not those folks who actually made a mistake. We are, again, falling into this caricature of being perfect in every way. My perspective is that we have to recognize the immigration system as a punitive system, as a system that is actually set up to detain and to punish human beings. And that if we are to advance in this country, when we're fighting for criminal justice reform, we also are changing our immigration laws and our systems in order for our folks to actually have a chance. And I believe that what we as an immigrant rights movement have to advance is a movement of human beings who commit errors, who also need justice and need protection and also need due process, that they need lawyers and representation, and that we really understand deportation and this kind of extra punishment as wrong, and that we fight against it. And I'm really proud of what we've done in California in order to seek to insert that justice by dealing with sentencing reform in the immigration context, but also of trying to force local law enforcement not to use immigration as another source of punishment for our communities.
Yes. Amazing. Amazing. So being mindful of time and to ensure everything. So I want to pivot to what's needed and what's next. So where do investments need to be made for immigrants to do more than merely survive circumstances and a system that was designed to fail? Maegan?
Yeah, so I'm going to pivot from my last answer about resources and think about shifting the issues on how everything is interrelated. A lot of people talk about intersectionality freely, but what does that truly mean when you talk about making investments? In order for our communities to thrive, the housing crisis or housing justice needs to be an immigrants' rights issue. When folks are being thrown out of their communities, Black and Brown immigrants have nowhere to turn to. They do not have legal resources or do not know how to access those legal resources. Fair funding for education is an immigrants' rights issue. When students are not properly invested in, and this leads to a lack of resources. This leads to lack of language access. ESL classes are cut and students are forced to be in classes without properly understanding the material. A lot of people talk about the youth is our future. How is that actually tying in to what's happening in school districts like in Reading, Pennsylvania? We have seen this in our own cities, one of the poorest school districts in the country. I think we need to be overall, when we talk about investments, we need to be innovative. For example, while we are working to shut down the Berks Detention Center in Pennsylvania, we are also pushing to use that facility to become a rehabilitation center for the opioid crisis. In order for our community to thrive, we need to think about investing in not only one thing, but all, because the folks that suffer the most are people of color and immigrants in particular.
Great. And so, Angelica, same question.
Well, first of all, I would just say, Maegan, that was beautiful, because I so believe that Chirla's mission is to create a just society fully inclusive of immigrants, but begin with our responsibility to create that just society. This is our home. And so to advance the rights of our community to have housing, good jobs, good paying jobs, especially, I think we sometimes don't talk enough about how this immigration system is set up in order to exploit the labor of other human beings. So really good jobs that provide decent wages, that provide you an opportunity to live. It means full access to healthcare and the safety net for all. And so that includes inclusive of immigrants. It is also about ensuring that our system is set up so that there is full funding for the integration of immigrants, access to English language or multiple language classes, access to citizenship, access to a democracy that actually is genuine and works. Those are the things we have to be fighting for. And it does require resources. So what we've done in California is really advance a collective agenda that seeks to request at the local, at the very municipal, at the county, and at the state level, investment in immigrant communities, understanding that we will benefit if there is more justice for all, but also understanding that if we that there are particular needs of the immigrant community that should be recognized and included. And the last thing I always say when we're talking about investments is these are our tax dollars, and what we're asking our elected officials is that they represent our needs and that they actually use our tax dollars for the benefit of our community. The last thing I would just say, there has to be more investment in wage and hour protections and wage and hour. There's way too many wage and hour violations. This is something where we need to also push to invest in and to also be in solidarity with other communities who are advancing that same idea of a just society for all.
Great. And Paola, your thoughts?
I mean, I think everything has been said that needed to be said with regards to how and where we need to invest in our communities to really create the society that we want for them, for us, for all of us. The only thing that I will add, and I'll keep it very brief, is I think that we also need to invest, after everything that's been said or in conjunction with everything that's been said previously, is in and around mental health. Our communities have been attacked for so long. The previous administration was particularly cruel, but before him and even after him, the cruelty has continued, the discrimination has continued. And what I see when I talk to people is deep-rooted pain and trauma, that we want our communities not just to survive, but we want them to thrive. And in order for them to thrive, we need everything that's been said here. And also we need to give them space and the ability to heal after whatever it is that they might have been fleeing in their home countries, the journey to get here, if it was a difficult journey, and the arrival after being here. The solitariness, the isolation of being an immigrant when you first arrive is something that we hear of often, something that my mom still talks about 30, 40 years later after she came to this country. Excuse me. There's just so much that we need to unpack for us to truly thrive. And that's what I think we're all saying here, is that we want us to be able to thrive. And that is the goal. The goal is to thrive, and with all of our help, with all of our vision, with all of our heart, with all of our imagination, with all of our dreams and our hard work and our pain and our sweat and our love, we can thrive. And I truly believe that we can do that.
Wow. Yeah. It's so important. I think even like Encanto, a kid movie, an animated movie, really emphasized how trauma can really go down to generation, and that it needs to be addressed and fixed. So thank you, ladies, all for this amazing discussion. And it was a very powerful conversation. And I'm honored to have shared the screen with each of you. I'd like to thank, of course, again, Monica, the Latinx House, and the Ford Foundation for the invitation to moderate and to be with you and our audience who come committed to these issues and ready to learn and ready to expand on what more we can be doing to meet the needs and partner with these great advocates and organizations at the forefront of immigration work in this country. It is so important, and we need to keep fighting and keep going. And I'm so honored to be here. Again, thank you so much. And don't forget to join us on May 17th for the third episode of Critical Conversation, the stories that impact our lives. So thank you again, everyone. And I'm honored to be here. And we are done here today.
This concludes today's episode on immigration, how to fix a system that was made broken. Thank you for joining us. We invite you to tune in to episode number 3, The Stories That Impact Our Lives. on Tuesday, May 17th at 1 p.m. Eastern. Critical Conversations is a Latinx learning series powered by the Latinx House and Ford Foundation with support from Hispanics in Philanthropy.